Good afternoon. Very good, very good. And I hope it doesn't bother you all too bad if I like to walk and talk. Hopefully this will work for everybody as well. I'm really excited about the opportunity to share today. When Dr. Hasan had approached me about this, the whole premise behind it was thinking about what is it about your journey, what is it about your story, how does it impact the work that you do and influence the decisions you make. And it was really something that had me thinking, right? And if I could, I want you to indulge me for just a moment, and if you would, I want you to take a back step, right? And just think about the past. Now, I was talking to Emily Davis the other day, and we were talking about graduating high school. Do I have any other 1999 alums in here? Anybody else graduate in 1999? Woo, woo! That's right, spring break 99. Thank you, Sarah. Okay. And we were talking about that, right? And that was one of the best graduating years, in the century. So if you would, I want you to take about 30 seconds. And I just want you to think about your academic journey that has led you to where you are today in the seat that you're sitting in, listening to me talk for this Hawk Talk. What was it that brought you there? Who were the people that touched your life? What were the experiences? What were the mistakes? What were the failures? What were the successes? What were the wins? What did it look like during that time in your life that ultimately prepared you to become the individual and the professional that you are today? When we take time to pause and reflect like that, sometimes it can be a humbling experience. And we think about the work that we do every day with students. And I think, there's this thing, Dr. Hasan and I were talking about this idea of compassion. And sometimes compassion is innate in individuals. Sometimes it's a learned skill. But also with compassion comes greater understanding. And when we have that level of understanding of others, it makes it a little bit easier to work through their flaws. Because if we're being honest, how many of us in here know that we've got some flaws? That's right, that's right. So being able to look through that lens with our students is a powerful thing. Now, what I want to ask you is this next statement. When we talk about education, what does it mean? And if education is the avenue to change and progress, I want to pose that as a question and ultimately gain your consent. How many of you would agree with me with that statement that education is an avenue to change and progress? Absolutely. I just asked you to reflect on that. You know that it's essential. So when you think about that journey, when you think about what that education does, for me, that ties into our mission. When we talk about a pathway, right? And we talk about what that truly means, what that truly looks like, it's a pathway, it's a roadmap, it's a journey that gets us to a better place in life to become the better version of ourselves than we ever could have been without it. And that's powerful. That's powerful. And when we think about that, Dr. Young has made statements about what's your why. I would ask that question, what is your why? Why are you here today? Why did you come to work this week? Why did you even take this job in the first place? What is your why? Maybe a paycheck. It may be a way to provide for your family. But in all honesty, there's probably something deep down inside that influences what you do. Especially for those of you that are educators that work directly with students, there's something there. And I want to challenge you to stir that thing up today. And when I think about the role and a lot of the work I've done since I've been here specifically with admissions and how that's impacted me, when we talk to students about career choices, it's not just a career. It's not just a job. And part of that mission, if we're truly going to be that pathway to prosperity, teaching and inspiring all who seek to learn, right? And this last part of it, growing careers and changing lives. Do you believe that? That's the thing we got to ask ourselves, right? And I know for me, it's something I find value in because when I talk to students, I talk about how do you connect something you're passionate about in life ultimately to an academic pursuit and then a career that has meaning, that has value, right? So if I'm working with a high schooler, I tell them, what is it about your life that you find value in? And how many of you have intrinsic motivators in your life, things that you do that make you feel good when you do them? Raise your hand if you've got one. You've got it. You know what those things are. They feel good. There's a sense of value with that. So when we talk about that, finding your passion, it's easy for me, right? I know the things I'm passionate about. Dr. Young shared a little bit before about my story and kind of my journey here to Hocking College. One of my passions is fishing, right? It's a big passion. I share it with my kids, my family, lots of other people. It's something that I enjoy, right? So when I talk to students about finding their passion, connecting it to an academic pursuit, and ultimately a career, what are the things in life that bring value to you? And for me, part of that passion is other outdoor pursuits, right? And specifically, when I'm able to share that with people I love or people who never have had that exposure, it's powerful, right? Finding your passion one more time, okay? I know you might say, Rob, that's a lot of fish pictures and a lot of hunting pictures, but just one more, last one, I promise, right? But that idea of finding your passion, those are things that have driven me throughout the journey of my academic pursuit, throughout my career, right? And that's what we do every day when we talk about teaching and inspiring. How is it that we can light a flame on the inside of a student for them to see a bigger vision of their life and what it could become, and ultimately help nurture that to its full potential? That's the power of the work that we do every day. So when you think about it, it's not only about finding your passion, which for me, it was easy, but then how do I tie that to an academic pursuit? And I know Dr. Young shared part of that story and what that looked like with me in an interaction with a conservation officer coming here to Hocking College, ultimately left here, went to the University of Idaho, and then as of late, Ohio University, right? So knowing that all along that journey, all along that path, there were steps that were preparing me for the next stage in life. Now, when we talk about ultimately a career, that was one of the great things. So for me, I came to Hocking, I did wildlife resource management, went to the University of Idaho, also did wildlife there, and I had some great opportunities, right, to work for the Idaho Department of Idaho Department of Fish and Game, Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Natural Areas and Preserves, doing a lot of great things, right? And with that came great experiences, right? And we talk about how that is for our students and what that looks like in this experiential learning setting. For me, that access that was granted for that career position was great because I got to work on some really great projects, right? Everything from bighorn sheep, and by the way, these aren't just internet pics. These are things that I took when I was working out there, right? So when we think about those experiences, being able to capture, collar, and track bighorn sheep, elk, bears, different things like that, just having that exposure, I was able to take not only that passion connected to an academic pursuit, but ultimately a career within the field of wildlife and fisheries, doing something that I love. And when we talk to our students, isn't that what it's about? It's about what is the end goal? What happens to you when you leave here, right? Because we do a disservice to our students if we only talk about what they do while they're here. What matters more importantly is what do you do when you leave here, right? What does that look like? And for me, that was great. I enjoyed it. You know, we got to work on fish traps. I did a lot of pit tagging work with salmon and steelhead. And you know, the picture on the bottom left there, that little cabin, what was unique when I worked for the Idaho department was that we would work 4-10s, right? So we would be gone away from home, wilderness backcountry, you'd stay in a cabin like that. What do you think you do after you're done with your 10-hour shift? Go fish. That's exactly right, you know. And that's what that other picture was. I know that one was a bit older and grainy, but for me it was like that passion was real. I'm getting paid to do something I love, and I get to go fish when I get off of work, right? Not to mention, you know, those sturgeon pictures I showed earlier, that was the same spots where I was working. That's how I found the honey holes, right? So, you know, when you think about it, it was like, okay, great. You're doing all this wonderful work, and you're enjoying what you do. But one thing that I found for me in that journey was that something was missing. It was great that every day I could go out and do something I loved, be in the outdoors, managing fish, managing wildlife, but at the end of the day, there was something still missing. When we talk about those intrinsic motivators, I didn't have that sense of accomplishment knowing that at the end of the day, yes, we may have conserved some habitat. Yes, we may have managed these species well to ensure their sustainability in the future, whatever it may have been. But the question I started to ask myself is, at the end of the day, did you make a difference in someone's life? And for me personally, that was a personal conviction because I knew that there was more than just having fun in that career. So when I had an opportunity at a facility down in West Virginia, and the guy who's in the top right there, his name's Chief Jim. He'd be mad if he saw this picture today, right? Because it's up here in front of all of you. But Chief Jim was one of the biggest mentors in my life. Because when I made a change to say, you know what, I want to go to this place called Presley Ridge, what drew me to that place was that there was a lot of young people who, in life, as kids, we don't get to choose the life we're given. We don't get to choose the family we're born into. We don't get to choose a lot of the things that's just given to us. And what I valued about this program was it was a wilderness youth camp working with troubled youth and adolescents. And for me, it was one of those things of how do I tie in this passion of outdoors into something else that also brings value to another human being's life. And when I looked at Presley Ridge, Chief Jim was one of those people ultimately that I met in my time there. I worked with them for about 8, 9 years before I came here to Hocking. And what was great was at that program, I was able to work in the role as a teacher counselor or program supervisor, where, you know what, I still took these groups of troubled kids out, did lots of fun things, but it was also introducing them to the outdoors, that thing that clicked for me, that thing that I found value in, making sure that when every kid left that program, they got a fishing pole and we taught them how to fish, right? Teaching them about camping. All of these kids who had never been out in the woods before, right? And it was all of these new skills, new experiences, and exposure that really impacted their lives. So when I thought about that and what that looked like for changing that career, it was tough. It was tough. And the reason it was tough is I met a lot of young people, and you know this when you meet your students and you build trust with them. Sometimes do students start telling you about what's going on in their life? When you build trust with a student, they start sharing with you about what's going on. And I know for me, in the work that we did, trust was paramount, so it was all about building relationships with kids and helping them overcome trauma. And many of these young people had gone through severe trauma, abuse, neglect. And if you think about behavior, how many of you have ever known somebody just to act crazy? Raise your hand if you've known somebody who just acts crazy, right? I will tell you this, all behavior has meaning. And especially in young adults and adolescents, many times there are things beneath the surface that influence the way that they act. And there was one young man who was, a kid, and I can't disclose their names, but we'll call him Russ. And Russ was a young man in the program. He had been in and out of trouble. And, when I met Russ, he talked to me a lot about his past and what it was like. And he grew up in a low-income family, single-parent home, a lot of gangs, violence, drugs, things going on in his community. And he started talking to me about some of the things that he was doing and the things that landed him ultimately in the program. And when we were talking about his life and his journey, he started to share what it was like. And when we see somebody at face value, we put them in the box and the lens by which we see the world. Because if we're honest, the lens through which we see others is based on our worldview of our life experience, right? But it became that point when compassion was given and understanding to be able to see things from his perspective. And he told me stories about different things and what had happened and how he ended up in trouble and how he ended up in the system. But one story really stood out to me, and he told me about how he had been in a dispute with another young man in the amount of about $150. And in that dispute, this other young man was a member of a gang, and he went to confront this guy. And as he confronted him, there was about 15, 20 people there. And the next thing you know, he's going there, confronting him, about to fight some guy, and then a gun comes out, right? Now that moment when that gun came out, lives changed, right? And as he told me that story, he talked about how when that gun came out, he felt like he was still 10 feet tall, bulletproof, didn't back down, handled his business, and did what he needed to do. And the young man he had conflict with was a young man named Drew. And he told me about how that situation, when he left it, he thought about, you know what, it's whatever, we got this right. But it was just a couple months later that he told me that Drew was in the same similar situation in the amount of $150 and went to go confront somebody else in the same type of manner in which Russ had confronted Drew. But this time when Drew went and confronted the other young man and the gun came out, this time the trigger was pulled. And this time when the trigger was pulled, it was pulled 3 times, and Drew died. Now, when you think about it, that's sobering, right? You're talking about teenage kids. And if you've not seen this before, and this was one of the things he talked about, was when the paramedics came and they took him away, in the neighborhood, in the projects, in the housing, there's blood all over the pavement. Do you know how they handle that? They pour bleach on it. They pour bleach on it to sanitize it. And he talked about how, remember, looking at that bleach and looking at the blood stains, and how that imprinted in his mind. And he talked about how he didn't understand what was the difference between him and Drew, that even though he did the same things and came from the same place, why it was that he didn't get killed and Drew did. So you might say, Rob, why are you telling me this story? We're talking about why we would do what we do as educators. The reason I'm telling you the story is this. Every day you see a student walk across this campus, it's easy to think that we know and we understand. But it's not until we take time and share compassion and understanding that we can build trust with students to learn about what they've gone through. Because the part that really stood out to me and impacted me most of all was when he talked about what was it that was different about him than Drew. And the sad thing is, when we talk about young people, we talk about gun violence, we talk about those different things, how many of you know that's traumatic? That's traumatic on young people. It is. It's traumatic on adults. You think about having to bury a child. And what stood out to me was, when you think about obituaries, they're always nice and they have a pretty image, don't they? And they talk about the life's accomplishments. But do you know in the newspaper they also have this other section that just says deaths, where they basically just report out on who died, where they lived? The clip I have at the bottom here is the obituary for Andrew Frederick Willis. And if you didn't know, in the story, that wasn't Russ, that was Rob. Andrew was a kid I grew up with, a kid I went to high school with. And I reflect often on Andrew because I say, you know what? His mom never got to see him turn his tassel to graduate from college. His mom never got to see him get married and raise a family. His mom never got to see him walk in the full potential of who he was created to be. So the reason I share that with you is this. What's your why? My why every day is to know that if I'm here and I've got another day on earth, there's more for me to do. There's a life for me to touch. There's somebody for me to impact. Because you know what? I'm not going to let Drew die in vain. This is all that's left to remember him in an old archive. So I don't say this to be sobering. I don't say this to make anyone feel down or feel bad. But what I want you to do is I want you to think. And I shared a quote that I like, and this is from Mr. Gaylord Nelson. If any of you are familiar with Earth Day, he's also a social advocate. Shared this quote: "The ultimate test of a man's conscience may be his willingness to sacrifice something today for future generations whose words of thanks will not be heard." And that's something that I take to heart. Of what does that look like? What are the impacts that we're making every day in students' lives that we may never get a pat on the back, we may never get a thank you, but it's noble work. And I want to challenge you. What is it that you've been prepared for? What is it in your personal journey and your why that drives you every day in the work that you do? What is it that's qualified you? And the question that's probably most important over all of it is, are you willing to sow the seed? Are you willing to sow the seed of understanding? Are you willing to sow the seed of compassion? Are you willing to let what I shared with you today not make you feel upset or down in any way, but recognize that, you know what, if this guy can make it here and talk to you today, that student in your class that doesn't come or is getting high or getting drunk or getting in trouble or doing all the other dumb stuff that can frustrate us, what do we see? Because I'll tell you what, when farmers look at a plot of land, they don't see dirt, they see soil. So I want to challenge you today. In the work we do every day, challenge yourself. See the soil that's evident and be willing to sow that seed, because you make a difference, you make an impact, and you make a change in the work you do every single day. Thank you.